Alan Magee, here we are at the museum, and you're sitting in Maine. And so, with all this fabulous technology, we have you here with us today. Thank you for joining us, and thank Monica for her patience with getting us all connected here. So it's good.
So
Yeah.
good. You really got to meet Monica during this
Yes,
process. So
indeed,
that's good.
indeed. Yes. So, if you could give us a short introduction to the work that we see here at the museum. We're looking at all these beautiful tapestries. So give us a short introduction to that, if you please.
What you're seeing is an exhibition, a collection of tapestries, but the work that led into it really is over decades. And I started drawing very young, and during the years following college, I worked for about 15 years as an illustrator, and following that, began to show in galleries, and that's when the imagery, like the stones and the art tools, began to take shape. So the work that you're seeing, the imagery in the show, goes back very many years, but the tapestry technique itself, I got started with that about 2001. Two California friends invented a method by which they could use a modern Macintosh to communicate to jacquard looms in Belgium. And that hadn't been done, that had been experimented with, but nobody had done it with that degree of control and fidelity until Don Farnsworth and John Nava worked out this method. And they came to an exhibition of mine in Los Angeles in 2001, saw the work that I had displayed, and said to me, these would make beautiful tapestries, because they had been working on this for the last couple of years. And very shortly after that, of course, I said, yes, I'd love to learn this. You have one of the first tapestries that I made. It's the one called Karen, the big, large arrangement of stones in blues and grays. That was an early one. And of course, I fell in love with the medium. I realized that you not only could work in a huge scale, but the inch by inch intricacy and beauty of the tapestry just appealed to me so much.
So that begs the question from me is looking at these pieces, why did you decide to basically transform your drawings into these these tapestry, these softer images?
I've always looked for and kind of practiced a diversity of methods. I'm a painter. I was an illustrator, certainly a sculptor. I like to work in film, but I think the beauty and scale of these appealed to me. Also, in some sense, the technical challenge, because you can send a file that you think is excellent to the loom, but you really don't see the tapestry, as you know, as Sherry said, you don't really see what the piece is going to look like until you see the woven object. So that kind of gift of looking at seeing what you had technically done, but you couldn't quite be sure of until you see the finished piece. So I think both the challenge of it and the beauty of the objects would be the answer to why. It's a very useful medium for taking an existing image and translating it into the tapestry medium, but it's also just as available to make a piece that never existed before. And there are some here in that category. The piece, Altstadt, for example, the piece that looks like a church in Eastern Europe, that was completely made from a monotype, from various collage elements. The piece called Shall We Dance was created for a musical group in Berlin, but the piece never existed as a painting. So the tapestry allows various things to come together, a monotype, a collage elements, a little bit of painting. So and then of course in terms of a surprise, that's completely a surprise, because no such picture existed until the tapestry is finally woven.
So that leads me to ask you, and I watched it in its entirety, the film that you created, Art is Not a Solace. And so can you tell me why you chose that title?
and it's from a book called What is Art that Tolstoy wrote somewhere around 1896. And what I think he meant was art is not a pleasure or an amusement or a solace. Art is a great matter. From the time I was a child, my use of drawing was more or less to record things that I had seen and witnessed rather than a scene, for example. So what I liked about that book and about that remark is that as artists, we're kind of confronted with what we see and observe. And it can't be then transformed in, well, will this make everybody happy? Of course, I'm very much in favor of communicating the joyous parts of life and the natural beauty of the world, but it isn't all about that. And I think that's why we can't, if we think of it as a solace, then we are responsible to always, to always offer that. Sometimes that you can't.
So looking at some of the pieces, especially some of your monotypes, the one that we have here, well, one of them anyway, is, and forgive me if I don't pronounce it correctly, Trauerarbeit?
Trauerarbeit.
Arbeit. Thank you.
Yeah, Arbeit, the German word for work. And it means work of mourning. Initially, I guess it came from Freud, but it was kind of went out of usage for a while, but was picked up again in Germany after the Second World War.
For our visitors, can you speak a little bit about that piece?
Well, that piece was one of a series that began in the summer of 1990. And this was not the war in the Gulf, the invasion of Iraq that happened in 2003, but this was an earlier case where an imminent war that was going to happen soon. And so in anticipation of that invasion, I began to make some monotypes. And these were not pre-planned. I wasn't thinking, how can I now make pictures that are about this? It's just that I was in some degree of dread about what this was going to be. And, people suffering at a great distance, things we don't see. So it was just useful for me, just for my own purposes, to start these monotypes and kind of just put this maybe unarticulated feeling about what was about to happen into a tangible form. And that came out as the monotypes. It kind of reminded me of the Second World War in Germany and the Holocaust itself. And the way it was handled was denial, usually parents that wouldn't speak to their children. And the word Trauerarbeit was reintroduced at that point by a couple of German psychologists who had observed there's something really very wrong with this society because nobody will talk about what just happened. Anyway, I felt some connection with, we have our own wrongs that are done in our name. And I simply wanted to address this right then when I was experiencing it rather than push it aside.
One of our docents here was asking, not really asking, but saying, she really wanted to hear your words on Genesis, the paint box. So could you speak a little bit about that, please?
In the 1990s, I just realized how much of my life I'd spent either looking at the watercolor paper or the canvas in front of me, and then turning back to this box of colors. So the first few paintings were my own open paint box that we got to know from elementary school with those soft brushes that never worked. But as the series developed a little bit, I realized, and I didn't at a certain point need to look at an existing paint box that I owned, but just to imagine the world of that paint box. But it's remarkable how many people identify with it, either childhood or maybe a life in the arts, or that it just opens up the possibility of creativity itself. It's the simple elements that open up to infinity. There can be anything we could dream of and beyond. It's about the creative instinct, the creative urge to make something.
The other piece that I was taken by is the Cairn tapestry. You've used number 3, I believe, is the title. So Cairn tapestry number 3, and that arrangement. I was wondering, it sounded like to me that you take the stones, beach stones, and you do the arrangement in your studio. And so, and is that what we're looking at here? Is the arrangement of these stones? Um, how is it that what makes you decide to place them? I mean, what is that? What's going through your head when you're doing that? When you're placing these
Well,
blocks all around and yeah.
that's a good question because that's not the way the Stones paintings began. They
Mm.
began when at the end of these years of working as an illustrator, and I just needed to wind that down. It was a condition of life that just required me to think of something different subject all the time, and I wanted something more stable to work with. So discovering the beach at Pemaquid Point, Maine, was for me, if you know from seeing the film, a kind of bridge out of those years of illustrating. A beautiful subject that I could work with and develop. And you asked particularly about the arrangements. The first paintings were simply based on near approximations of what I was actually seeing on the beach. I didn't arrange them. I was just already in awe of the natural arrangements that kept happening and changing. So that began to connect in my mind to the stones at Pemaquid, and I was just thinking how the stones had become, not to over mystify it, but they'd become a kind of an object of contemplation or reverence for me. This goes back to prehistory, that people have taken stones, brought them to a place, and arranged them, for reasons of their own, but it always seemed to have to do with a beautiful part of the world, a beautiful valley or something that focused your attention on the beauty of the place itself.
What do you want the viewers to go home with after they've seen your exhibit?
Well, of course, everybody will go home with something different, and this is unpredictable. I guess what I want to offer is sort of an alternative to the clamor of life for a little bit, and to stop time for a little bit, to stop the urge to go on to the next thing. I've always felt that art has affected me in ways that have been very positive, not always a solace, sometimes opening up the windows to things that need to be thought about. And all you can try to do is to do the best you can to see that might happen for somebody else.
But I just want to thank you for all that you've contributed, and especially for putting this time aside for these interviews. They're so important for our visitors. It's such a big part of how they approach the work and what they see and what they take away from the show. So thank you to you, and thank you to Monica, and it's been a pleasure.
Okay, likewise. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye for now.
Bye. Bye.